I'm reading from the New International Version. Let us listen to God's word. The narrow and wide gates. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few will find it. Thanks be to God.
Well, thanks, Bob. Well, when we think of history, and recent history to be specific, a few things stick out to us as spoken word. The beauty of spoken word. Speeches by famous men and women have rallied generations to moral causes, to action, and to the defense of what is right. They have changed hearts and minds, and the same can be said for quotes and one-liners. So I wonder if you'll recognize a few of these, a bit similar to what we played with the boys and girls. First one, and I quote, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do all the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." Anyone know that one? Who said that? John F. Kennedy, Rice University. Another one. "I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. I have a dream." Martin Luther King Jr. Another one. "Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." Anyone? Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address. Another one, some of you may remember this one. Well, maybe some of you remembered Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but some of you might remember this one. "The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." Remember who said that? It's Ronald Reagan in his address after the Challenger space shuttle disaster. Another one. "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Churchill, we all know that one. These are all inspiring. Some of them sad, but they give us a warm feeling, a feeling of hope, a feeling of a bright future. But here's one more. "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it, but small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Well, of course, it's Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount, arguably one of the most famous speeches and teaching in history, certainly the most impactful. But these verses specifically, I don't know about you, but they don't give that same sense of warmth. And in no way am I being critical or being dismissive, but just honest and truthful about myself. Yes, within the beauty and hope of the teaching of Christ is an unnerving reminder. It makes us a wee bit uneasy. Right in the Sermon on the Mount, we're told that the path to life is narrow. But let's unpack this. Let's go on a journey and we'll see how the narrow gate leads to the road less traveled. But it's a call to Christ's faithfulness. But first, what is the wide gate? What is the broad path? The prophet Isaiah says this of the broad path: "Their feet rush into sin. They are swift to shed innocent blood. They pursue evil schemes. Acts of violence mark their ways. The way of peace they do not know. There is no justice in their path. They have turned them into crooked roads, and no one who walks along them will know peace. The wide path that is being spoke of here, it's everything that Christ isn't. It's injustice, it's violence, it's evil. And let's face it, if we're going to be honest, the tendency of the human heart, of our hearts, is for all these things. We choose these things in small measures or in big measures, injustice, violence, evil, over the things of God, truth, beauty, and goodness. We are drawn into sin and into this wide path, and that's why the gate is wide and the path is broad, because we are drawn into it. We're drawn into it specifically by three things. Three things causing us to sin. The first, we could say, is the devil. It's Satan, working in the darkness. He brings us down and he tempts us. The personification of unholiness, of evil, of bad things. That leads us to the wide path and the broad gate. Second is the flesh, as we're instructed as Christians to crucify the flesh because it leads to impurity. Our fleshly desires of our bodies, they're impure, they're imperfect because of the fall. Romans 8:6 says, "For the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and peace." And the third thing which leads us to this path is the world. The way we're told to think and the way we're told to live selflessly. And that mindset that says, it isn't how you can help others, it's how others can help you. But yet this path is wide and it's easy to enter because, again, when we examine our hearts, we know deep down that we choose it. Because it seems to feel better, it seems to end better, but this is the truth of the wide gate and the broad path which Jesus tells us. Its destination is destructive, it's destruction and separation from God. This path has been walked by many. The world in the time of Noah, the Pharaoh in the Exodus, Judas Iscariot, Adolf Hitler, Stalin, Ted Bundy, Jimmy Savile. The wide path leads to destruction and evil. So what is the alternative? Well, verse 14 says, "But small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only few find it." It seems scary. The right path is narrow and hard to enter. So how do we enter it? When Jesus says, "Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." The third thing there, mind. It's third on the list. Follow and love the Lord with all your mind. Each of us have been given a beautiful mind. Some are articulate, some are creative, some are mechanical, some are mathematical, but all of our minds are gifts, and we are called to use them to discern truth and righteousness, to discern that way to the narrow gate. When we see evidence of God in nature and in science, and then we hear the gospel of Jesus Christ and we contemplate it, we must use that miracle that we've all been given, which is our mind, to decide, will I walk the path which is narrow or walk the path which is broad? The narrow gate leads to salvation, but it's narrow because it takes faith and it takes perseverance. And the wide gate, it represents a life of self-indulgence, sin, and following the ways of the world. So how do we enter that narrow gate? Jesus Christ. John 10, verse 9 says, Jesus says, "I am the gate," and he gives life and life to the full. That's the full story here. You see, yes, this is a warning to us about not following the way of the world, but truly it's reassuring. that the gate may be narrow, but the way in that gate is simple. To believe that Jesus died for your sin on the cross and that 3 days later he rose again. Over church history, many have said that the path is narrow because it's hard to do what is required of us to tread it. And this is true, but let's face it, none of us and none of the saints have ever walked the path in the way which the law has instructed us to, and that's the standard that we were told we would be held to. But the path is narrow because there's one way in. The gate is narrow because there's one way in, and that is Jesus Christ, the only way to God. He said, "No one comes to the Father except through me. No one enters through that gate except through him who is the gate." And this is how you enter that gate to salvation. I don't know, maybe you're thinking, I don't like that. Doesn't sound fair. How can there only be one way? How are the other ways wrong? Who are we to say that as Christians? Who is Jesus to say that? That the broad road leads to destruction, the path that many walk leads to destruction? Well, it's a truth claim. If Jesus said he is the truth, by definition, that means there is no other truth. And that makes others wrong. And we can say that. We can say, with respect, you're wrong. That is not what is right. It's like asking a simple question, asking what 2 plus 2 is. And if you give me the answer 5, well, I'm going to say that's wrong. And that's not me being narrow-minded or being bigoted, or us as Christians saying it's narrow-minded or bigoted. It's because it's the truth. It equals 4. That is what the truth is. If you sit an exam and write the wrong answer, you're going to get marked wrong. That's not unfair. That's just. When Jesus says he is the way and the gate to the path of salvation, it's not unfair. It's just. He's giving us the right answer. So let's put our faith in him, because he is truth and light, and the darkness has not overcome that light. The path to life is narrow because we can't walk it, but Jesus walked it, and that's the point. Jesus walked it, the perfect, narrow path of no sin and righteousness. That gate isn't good works either. It's a gift from God. That those who walk this narrow path, they are carried by Christ. And that leads us to want to love others and do good things to others through our deeds. But we are called to persevere. We don't get there through our good deeds. When we walk the path that leads to us, or to our good deeds, but it doesn't get us in that gate. And it won't be easy, and it isn't easy, and you know that better than I do. It isn't easy with your experience, but just keep walking. But this is the road less traveled, because a lot of people would rather live a life with the goal of having their best at the center and their most convenient life at the center, rather than arduously striving to develop loving character. That is the road that leads to destruction, because whatever it is about us that is inconsistent with the nature of God and his love and truth, it has to be destroyed. It has to be crucified, that we can live for Christ and reflect his love in the kingdom. For us to walk this narrow path, we must accept Christ, and that means self-denial. It's a path of discipleship, of sacrifice, and of obedience, and that is the path that leads to life. That God calls people to walk in this narrow path, but he equips you to walk along that road. We have the help of the great high priest, the mediator, Jesus Christ. At Cook, my home congregation, for the last 9 weeks we've been in the book of Hebrews, looking at chapter 11, the hall of faith. But the whole endeavor of the 9 weeks has encouraged me to brush up on the rest of Hebrews as a whole. And Hebrews sets out that Jesus Christ is the mediator between God and man, And that isn't Moses, it isn't Aaron who helps us walk along that road, but it is Jesus. So as we walk that path, the narrow path which Christ has called us to, he is interceding for us. He is supporting us. He is praying for us. It's a path of discipleship and of self-denial, but it's a path of joy and love and peace and goodness and beauty and truth. In the 1930s and 40s, as fascism and Nazism rose and swept across Europe, Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer took a stand for what he believed was right. And he gave us his thoughts on why we had ended up in a place where evil and complacency for evil was so profound. In his book, The Cost of Discipleship, he opens with his thoughts on cheap grace and costly grace, and it's fascinating. And I think his analogy of this really speaks to the wide and the narrow gates. You see, Bonhoeffer's interpretation of Matthew 7, 13 and 14, it called for a radical commitment to following Jesus, and one that transcends mere religious observance, mere coming to church on Sunday, and it embraces the life of genuine transformation, that of costly discipleship and costly grace. Cheap grace, being watered down, passive Christianity, doesn't lead to genuine transformation of the heart or the lives of believers. It leads to the broad path, the path that leads to destruction, which many walk. It leads to the path where we start to accept starving children and people in Gaza as just a part of life. We start to accept sex scandal and pedophile rings as just another part of life that maybe doesn't affect us, but it's all right. Where we start to accept that human dignity is in what you can do for society, and once you're no longer valuable, you can be put to death. It's where we start to accept the moral failures of our politicians as okay. And it's when people started to think maybe Nazism and fascism were the solution to all Europe's problems. That is the wide path that leads to destruction. So we need that costly grace that leads us to the narrow path. And that's why it's narrow, because it's costly. And because we walk it with Jesus, we stand up for what is right. It's good. It's a great path. It's the best path. It's difficult, but it's love of the Lord your God and Jesus and your neighbor. So let's not fear that the path to destruction is wide. But let's not forget the cost of walking that narrow path and that narrow road and entering through that gate. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.